Hello, my name's Andy Home, and I'm the senior metals columnist at Thomson Reuters, specialising in all industrial metals.
That's a big portfolio. But today we're going to talk about tin specifically because I think it's everyone's got a little bit excited about tin last year and this year, and it's predominantly something that's serviced by private companies, and we as investors are sort of interested in the public company opportunities, obviously. But you're going to talk more broadly about the market as a whole. So we better start with, what's it used for?
Yeah, great question. And one that's actually, the answer has changed to that question over the last few years, right? So if you're a man of my generation, most tin was used in tin packaging, tin can packaging, right? For perishable goods, long-lasting goods. That now really only accounts for about 15-16% of tin demand. It has steadily lost its market share to other materials, think plastics, think aluminium over the years. So most tin now, just over 51%, is actually used for soldering, and not just any sort of soldering. We're talking about circuit board soldering, right? You ever taken the circuit board apart and looked at all those wonderful little coloured shapes on that board? Well, what sticks it all together? Well, it used to be a combination of lead and tin solder. And now, as we don't like lead anymore in our environment, it is becoming purely tin solder. So it has been described, I think, accurately as the metal that glues the internet together. No tin soldering, no circuit boards. No circuit boards, no electronic goods. So it is very beholden to cycles in the electronic goods sort of like a sector, right? You've got smaller, it's a wonderful metal, has lots of other applications. We could talk about sort of like, tin in chemicals, which is another 15% of usage. Believe it or not, it goes into lead acid batteries to improve performance, which is actually not a bad performing sector for it at the moment. It gets alloyed with copper for another whole spectrum of applications. But the big one we want to focus on, I think, as the future application, circuit board soldering. It is the material now of choice for any circuit board in the world.
Okay, well, and there's a few other things that are maybe bandied around, but some of the numbers you're giving us suggest perhaps the secondary or tertiary importance with obviously the advent of AI data centers and renewable energy and electric vehicles, etc. But let's stick with the main show, circuit boards. Before we do, let's talk about where the tin is coming from. Who are the main players in the market?
So, we got a very limited number, and I think you referred to this earlier on. We've got a limited number of big players in the market, which tend to be either government-owned in many cases or privately held, mostly government-owned. So, biggest producer of tin in the world, China. Like everything else, right? Where you really got a huge smelting network. And of course, these guys sort of like, you name an end use, China is a strong player in that end use sector, whether it be tin plating, whether it be circuit board soldering. China is the big player, right? You have Indonesia, which is actually the world's largest exporter of refined tin. So it has its own smelters, it has its own mines there. It's kind of vertically integrated. We're going to mention South American countries like Peru, like Brazil, and Bolivia. Again, operators there tend to be either sort of privately held, state-owned, a little bit of mixture of two, vertically integrated with their mines. Yeah. And then you've got, a sort of a new emerging producers. And I'm thinking really of the African countries here. So I'm thinking of the Congo. I'm thinking of Nigeria, and at the moment, and Uganda we could throw in. At the moment, most of these are mine-only producers. There is quite a lot of movement on maybe building a Central African tin smelter, but for now, right as we speak today, these guys are largely exporting tin in raw material form. And then we have the joker in the pack. We have Myanmar. Myanmar hosts some of the best tin deposits in the world and has one of the largest mines in the world. It's called Manmao. Now, this is where things get a little bit more complicated, right? Because when we talk about Myanmar, okay, it's a very sort of chaotic country at the moment. The big mine is not controlled by the Myanmar government, and it hasn't been for many years. It actually resides in a part of the country controlled by the Wa United State Army. which is one of the largest ethnic groups in Myanmar, and is best referred to, I've referred to it as semi-autonomous, and it has been for several years, right? So between, between Myanmar, Indonesia, the South Americans, China, and the Africans, that is pretty much the essence of your global tin market. Yes, there's a few mines scattered around in Australia, but these are the power players, if you like.
Okay, so there's not too many players in a small market, and you've got things like the ethnic Wa territory, which is I guess fairly independent group, and they have the ability to maybe change the market. So these are the kind of things that I look forward to try and assess the risk involved in what's happening in the tin market. So should we start with the demand side of the equation? Because I want to know that what I'm investing to is selling into a strong market. So what's the news on tin? Investors seem pretty excited about it last year.
Yeah, look, tin's got a great long-term story. As you mentioned, some of its applications in the next generation technology. The here and now, not been a great time for tin demand. So once a year, the International Tin Association takes a survey of its members, tin users from around the world, and asks them how their business is going. Right? And in the opaque world that is tin, this is one of our best demand indicators we get every year, right? It just published its latest annual report on this. A bit of a shocker. So tin demand actually contracted by almost 4% last year. And when this survey last took place last year, everyone was expecting a little bit of a dip. But the consensus was about a 1.6% decline in usage. No, it was more than double that, right? And there was weakness really across most of the main demand areas. So soldering, more than 50% of all usage. It contracted. Tin usage in that sector contracted by 1%, right? You're looking to some of the other areas like tin and chemicals, or tin and copper alloys. In some cases, you're looking at double-digit year-on-year declines. The good news is, if you like, the guys, 80 companies, by the way, participated in the survey. It's about 40% of all global tin usage. So these guys should know what they're talking about, right? They're expecting a sort of the ITA itself called a moderate recovery this year. So think about 3% a year-on-year growth in tin consumption. Not quite enough to offset last year, but moving in the right direction, if you like. But tin has its cycles like every other metal. And if you really want to know, maybe what the underlying issue of the last couple of years has been, I want you to cast your mind back to the COVID lockdowns, right? If you're like me and like anyone else, what did we all do? We sat at home and we ordered lots of electronic goods, whether it be new laptops, whether you got a new, media center to pass away your lonely lockdown hours. The world ordered up on electronic goods. Yeah, tin demand was fantastic because of everything that needs a circuit board has got a bit of tin in it, right? Now think about that. What we did collectively, we pulled forward future tin demand, right? So once you've splurged on everything you need, you're probably not going to buy it for another 3 or 4 years to replace it. And particularly, you're not going to replace it if, as we have experienced in many Western countries, there's been a bit of a cost of living crisis. So in some ways, we're seeing the long tail end, if you like, of our electronic buying spree during COVID. Tin has had this long tailwind, this long headwind of usage against it in the soldering sector. So even though tin's share of solders is increasing all the time, because we're trying to phase out lead, right? So it always used to be tin-lead solders. Now you're moving to increasingly pure 100% tin solders. Even though that's increasing, the state of the electronics market over the last 3 or 4 years has not been great because, as I said, we all bought everything we needed in 2020, 2021.
Makes sense. I think I'm actually going to quote some numbers which you wrote, which is in terms of the refined and unrefined forms of metal, they dropped 4.9%, nearly 5%.
Yes.
That in 2023, which is quite extraordinary. I think the expectation is that this year we'll see a moderate growth in response as a result for the reasons you say. People just brought forward some of their spending during COVID. It makes sense. It's what we do. If I look at were there any kind of other demand shocks in there, or was it all around the kind of the circuit board and etc.?
Well, I mean, by sort of like, percentage contraction rate, I mean, the circuit board soldering didn't fare that badly, if you like, but although 1% sort of disappointing outcome. You're looking at things like, when you look at things like tin, copper alloys, that may be a sector which is quite exposed, say, to the construction sector. So, and we know that, I mean, construction has been a real weak point, not just in the West, but it's also been a weak point in China, right? A lot of these, I mean, subsectors are going to be quite volatile as well. So you had quite a sharp fall in tin chemical usage last year, but that is expected to bounce back more strongly this year, for example. So, I mean, it just really goes to show, man, I mean, like, tin is a really diverse metal now in terms of its applications. I mean, we could take in a whole range of different sort of, like, I mean, sectors we talk about it. One thing I will mention, I mean, one which did actually grow last year and is going to grow again this year is tin in lead acid batteries. You're going to go, well, what on earth is that about? Oh, you're switching to LED batteries, right? The e-bikes in the developing world still tend to use lead acid batteries, right? You know, those little like scooter things, they need replacing quite often. And obviously they grow in popularity across the developing world. It's actually a bit of a growth story for tin, even though at some stage we're all expecting them to be swapped out for e-scooters. But that's not really happening at the moment in those countries for cost reasons, and also for charging.
Right. If I just take something on the demand side before we move into supply there, which is what we're starting to do, is there's an expectation of a kind of demand response this year, albeit modest. We've seen in other metals the huge inability to actually read and call inventory levels being held in China. We see that with nickel, we've seen that with copper. Who regulates, or how do we get a sort of more certain view of what inventory levels look like?
Okay, so we're going to take them. We're going to start off with everyone's favorite, which is what we call visible stocks. What are visible stocks? That's inventory registered with either the London Metal Exchange or the Shanghai Futures Exchange, right? And that's what we know as exchange stock levels. So just to give you an example, right, I mean, of what I was saying about that demand weakness in 2023, the Shanghai stock levels, right, in May last year, I think got up to just over 20,000 tons, right? That's the highest they've ever been since that contract has traded. So, even though we know that there are what I would call invisible stock levels, they're those held by industry, those held by the supply chain, there's still a good indicator what's held on the exchange, right? Because when you see an exchange inventory mushroom so aggressively, it is a good sign that there is quite a lot of surplus metal around, yeah? So, the London Metal Exchange stocks, I mean, fell in the first part of the year, this year, but have been pretty stable. I mean, around 4,500 tons. Again, if you combine the two exchange stock figures together, okay, we hit a peak around May of this year. There has been a drawdown, but it's been a subdued drawdown. And that's pretty much what I would expect to see, given the ITA's view that we're going to a moderate recovery in demand this year.
Right, interesting.
Now, when you want to go, where do you want to go? Well, what's lying around in the States, stockpiles in China, Matt? I have no idea. Hardly anyone does. You look for maybe a specialist local data provider, someone like Shanghai Metal Market, who will try and assess those stock levels. But I mean, this is kind of this is no science at this stage. It's just sort of like guys ringing around trying to get an idea: are your stocks less? Are they more than they were last year? So the ITA itself said that on the consumer side, the tin users that it asked, stock levels were actually pretty stable last year. I think it was just shy of, say, 4 weeks global supply. Not much change around there. So you've got industry stocks holding pretty level, building Shanghai Futures Exchange stocks particularly, and all that should slowly go into reverse this year, right? Tin consumers are expecting their stock levels to decrease over the course of this year as they try and gear up to meet that demand bounce. But again, I mean, only down to say maybe just the lower end of the 3 to 3.5 3.5 weeks worth of supply.
Right. Okay. Interesting. In fact, I'll ask the question, which is, how do metal traders or some of these smelters view the need for inventory level? I mean, you just said it's dropping, but how do they view inventory level requirements given things like, and we're about to talk about it in a second, which is the Myanmar mine in Myanmar with the Wa state, which you've talked about already, is 7% of your global production. They've been, I guess, no update. They're basically not producing at the moment. I think that's still true. Surely that makes metal traders nervous.
Yeah, I mean, look, in some ways, again, trust the market here, right? So despite everything I've just said about demand being a terrible year last year, only a modest recovery this year, put all that to one side, look at what the tin price has done on the London Metal Exchange this year. It is the outperformer of the industrial metals. The last I looked, it was up 25% on the start of the year. Next best performer, I think, was zinc, 15% by comparison. A couple of them are sort of like about actually showing year-to-date losses. So you've got to ask yourself, if demand wasn't that great, you've got quite high stocks, why does tin command a premium over its peer group metals? And the answer is supply risk. Supply risk is boiled in to that outperformance of tin, I would say. And the biggest supply risk, as you said, is the fate of the Myanmar mine in Myanmar, right? Should we discuss that for a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, tell us what's happened. But yeah, I think I was right with the 7% number of global tin output, right? So tell us, what's happened there?
Well, first thing, that's what we think it produces. Bear in mind, this is not an outfit that releases quarterly production statements, right? It doesn't work that way, right? They kind of like they dig it up and they ship it straight over the border to the Chinese smelters. So everything we say about it is we got to accept there is a lack of precision around some of these numbers because, frankly, not many people go into the wild states of Myanmar, right? Least of all in the current border situation in the country, right? What we do know, right? So in about, I think it was March last year, the Wa state authorities ordered the suspension of all their mines, actually, in the state, all the tin mines, from the 1st of August, for what they called an audit. See what was still in the ground, what people were doing, what was sitting around in processing plants. Fine, right? So thanks for the warning. Sort of like in August, it happened. Now, the word at the time, the word on the Chinese street, because the only guys who have real access to the Wa state are, of course, the Chinese buyers of the tin concentrates, right? So we're all a little bit dependent on what information they get from the Wa state government, right? There are no press releases. Unfortunately, they do not send Andy home an email telling me what they're doing, right? But the word on the street was, look, don't panic. It's just an audit. It's going to take 3 or 4 months. And we reckon by the start of 2024, we're back in business, right? And sure enough, the smelters did build up stocks. They kind of sucked as much as they could out of Myanmar because they knew this was going to happen, right? But here's the problem. We're over a year on. It's still closed. They've allowed one or two of the very smaller tin operations to reopen, right? They've allowed some movement of surface stocks from the mine. But to the best of anyone's knowledge, this mine remains suspended and is not producing. Our best gauge of what's going on, if you like, since we don't get any production figures, is to look at how much raw material China is importing from its neighbor. And that has just been declining and declining and declining. And I think in September, it was just 1,400 tons. That's the bulk weight of the concentrates, by the way, not even the metal contained. That's a very low figure. And that tells me that, whatever's going on there, no one's actually mining again, because as soon as they mine, you can guarantee that the material will start flowing over the border again. They have no tin smelter. They're just going to process it into concentrates and ship it to a Chinese smelter to be refined into tin, right? So on that measure, right, there is no sign of any activity at the Myanmar mine, because if there were, we wouldn't be seeing this sort of the steady drop in raw material imports from Myanmar to China.
Right. What do you think this is going to do to price? You talk about it being one of the best performers this year. I guess which is why people are excited. But I look to things like the lithium market over the past 2 years. And going back in history, copper market's done the same thing. When there's these kind of big reactions because of incidents, like we're talking about here with Myanmar, there's going to be a reaction at some point once it comes back online. So again, if I'm trying to understand the risk to price and the volatility, etc., what would you say? What do I need to understand?
Okay, well, let's start off with what's happening right now, yeah? So I think what I'm picking up as from local data suppliers in China is there is now a genuine distress among some tin smelters, those particularly who, of course, relied on Myanmar feed over the last few years. There is no doubt in my mind that there is no production growth at the tin smelting stage in China, and in fact, probably it's moving in the opposite direction. It's actually contracting now. Chinese smelters have been taking extended maintenance downtime. They've been sort of they've done everything they can to eke out the raw material stocks they have, but you do get a sense that we're kind of running out of space here, guys. You know what I mean? You really, really need this mine to start reopening again. Now, they haven't been able to offset its loss by imports from other countries. The overall, I think, total tin imports of raw materials into China this year are down by a third on last year. And that's unsustainable for a lot of smelters there. So the first issue is, we're going to see a reduction in Chinese refined tin output, bearing in mind it's the largest producer in the world, right? To some extent, the demand weakness of the last year has done them a big favor, right? People have not obviously been biting their hands out for more hands off for more tin from their smelters, but we're now looking at a modest recovery in demand, just at the time, and a lot of Chinese smelters are going, well, I'm not quite sure how we're going to meet this because we were running out of feed, right? So I think there could be upside price risk from this. We started to see those Shanghai stocks being drawn down. I think that's one sign of a tightening local market. We started to see China, which was a net exporter of refined tin in the first half of this year, has started stepping up imports. What does that tell me? Your stocks are going down. You're looking for overseas material. You are running a bit short, guys, of refined tin in your domestic market. And demand weakness has sort of masked how short you have been. But we have this period right now. We're going to see whether sort of the supply chain can cope with the demand recovery, right? Now, obviously, as you said, this is a speculative market as well. If you get a headline, if we end this interview and Reuters flashes up the headline going, Myanmar to reopen, what do you think is going to, of course, it's going to be a sell-off, right? That would be a futures market reaction. Even if it were to reopen now, of course, allow for 2 or 3 months for the mining activities to get going again, so the processing activities to get going again, and the material to get flowing again to the Chinese smelters. Whichever way you look at it, if I'm a Chinese smelter, I'm worried till the end of the year. And the longer I hear nothing about Myanmar, the more worried I'm going to become, right? So it's the big known unknown in the market. It is a bit of a ticking supply bomb. But if you want to know why tin's outperformed on the futures markets this year, it's that. That's the risk premium. Everyone knows that there's a problem here. We all know that we have no idea when the problem is going to be resolved, right? Which is the market's worst case scenario, if you think about it. Will there be an announcement tomorrow? I don't know. Will there be an announcement in the next month? I have no idea. No one knows. It's the war authorities. They don't issue press releases.
Right. Risk understood. Talk to me about coming back to some of the main players. Obviously China, and you've just carefully explained that China's importing, and I assume they're getting all the imports they need. Are they to meet their needs? Are we saying not quite? Is that the?
Well, I mean, in terms of raw materials, definitely not. Right?
Definitely not. Okay.
Overall, raw materials, everything from every origin country, down a third this year. That's largely because, the collapse in imports from Myanmar. But it tells you they have not been able to offset the loss of that supply from other countries. Yeah, they're getting a bit more from the Congo. They're getting a bit more from Australia. They're getting a bit more from Nigeria. But the big picture, yeah, that overall raw material imports have dropped by a third this year. Then when we start talking about the refined tin market, and they are looking obviously to sort of import more, this is where we get onto our second big known unknown on the supply side, which is Indonesia, right? So Indonesia is kind of vertically integrated as a producer. What it mines, it smelts. And what it smelts, it exports as refined metal. It's the world's biggest exporter of refined metal, right?
Are these Chinese smelters in Indonesia?
No, these are largely Indonesian. We have an official sector. One is state-owned, and the rest of them are Indonesian, sort of like a privately held operators.
Because with nickel, it's kind of, they tend to be
the analogy.
A lot of Chinese smelters.
No, the analogy is not the same now. I would say the Indonesian industry is much more strong.
That's where I was going to go next. So I'm glad you picked up on that.
But we have a problem in Indonesia, right? Because the government's stated policy is, we're going to stop all exports, guys, because we don't want to export this stuff as raw material anymore. We want to make it into product, right? And as you mentioned nickel. This is exactly the template that they followed on nickel. Very successfully, it must be said. But there's a problem with tin. You've got to think about this, right? So tin, in some ways, was the first metal that the Indonesians really clamped down on in terms of export flows. There was a lot of illegal mining taking place in Indonesia. Metal was coming out. Semi-refined metal was coming out. Ores were coming out. So to seize control of the sector, they put an export ban on tin raw materials, so concentrates, ores, right? They said, okay, no, you want to play this game in this country, you've got to have your own smelter and make it into refined metal, right? And they succeeded. That's why it is the largest exporter of refined metal. Now you go, well, actually, I really want you not to even export the refined metal. I want you to use that in Indonesia. That's tricky, right? So you're going to persuade all the world circuit board companies, all the semiconductor guys, to come and relocate to Indonesia so they can use Indonesian tin in their solder. This is a very well-established supply chain with Chinese, Taiwanese, Hong Kong, Asian. No one's really going to do that, right? So the Indonesians are kind of like, well, I know what you want to do, but how are you going to upgrade tin further from refined form to product? It's not as easy as doing it for nickel, for example, right? Maybe you can lure a couple of tin plating plants in, for example, on the steel side. Maybe you could set up a tin chemical plant, right? But can you set up a domestic industry that's going to absorb all of your tin exports? I don't think they've come up with an answer to that yet. The official policy is, we're going to phase out exports. And they've said that for 2 or 3 years. And we've had no further details. So I think the Indonesians are scratching their heads a little bit, going, this is what we want to do, but it's actually not going to be as easy with tin as it has been with some of the other metals that we mine, right? But obviously, as long as that remains government policy, we've got to be worried about it, right? Because, it is stated government policy. At some stage, we're going to phase out tin exports, guys. So if you think about the big picture here, right? The first big known unknown is one of the world's largest mines in Myanmar. The second big known unknown is the world's largest exporter of refined metal, which has a policy to say we don't want to export for a long time in the future. So this is all kind of part of I would call the supply premium that's boiled into that tin price. And he said there's not many players. It's a small market, right? If Indonesia were to go down this route, it would, it cuts off a lot of the world's tin supply. It's not an easy, metal just to, I've got a new mine, I'm going to start up a new smelter or anywhere else, right? And I said, this is tin's long-term supply challenge, because we can get as bullish as we like about its demand applications, particularly in new energy vehicles, etc., etc. But we have to have some confidence that the global supply chain can meet that demand. And with two of the biggest names, if you like, in the supply chain, with these uncertainties hanging around them, it's a big problem for tin.
I think it's interesting, because and sort of come back to the nickel analogy, and I get that the nickel analogy is not the same on the smelter front, but the Indonesian government's policy on trying to, keep as much of the supply chain in country as possible. With nickel, they've pretty much said the same. We want to be the OPEC of nickel. ONEC, I think that is the the acronym that they're using. And if they do, and they all headstrong on this one, there will be some growing pains. But I don't see what choice some of whether it be the Koreans, Japanese, Chinese, whatever, are going to have, but to put, invest into Indonesia, and that's the demand. And it feels like potentially it's kind of a seller's market in that sense. The seller has got the power because the buyers don't have too many other options. And with Myanmar out of the loop and China not doing what it's meant to be doing, it'd be interesting to see how that all plays out, but it'll take time.
Absolutely. And as I said, I mean, tin was sort of like the poster child of this policy. I mean, sort of going back 10 years, right? What's happening in nickel now happened to tin in Indonesia 10 years ago. So the new policy, so you cannot export nickel ores anymore. You cannot export nickel raw materials anymore. You have to upgrade so we become a major producer of refined nickel, right? They've done that with tin. That's already been done, right? So the next phase of saying, okay, now you got it up to refined metal form, you have to attract the world's users here, and if I'm kind of, think about it this way, if I'm sort of like, I don't know, a big semiconductor manufacturer, right, and I'm using tin on my soldering boards, right, in the grand scheme of what I am manufacturing, tin is not the most important element in my in tray, if you like, right? The chances of me moving an entire sort of offshore reshoring, an entire sort of like established semiconductor plant to Indonesia for what is one of many and a relatively minor input. And I think this is the problem, right? This is the problem. This is why Indonesia's not done it on tin yet. If they had worked out a way to do it, they would have done it, right? But you can't quite just replicate, say, nickel, for example. Okay, what do we use nickel for? Stainless steel. Okay, brilliant. So we can build a new stainless steel plant in Indonesia, which uses the nickel from our mines, right? That's very different from when you're talking about a semiconductor or a chip manufacturing plant, right? It's still industrial as opposed to sort of, you're getting up to very different levels of technology when you're talking about where tin's used in soldering, for example. Could you do it for tin plating? Yeah. But as I said to you, tin plating is only about 15% of global usage now. You could build enough tin plate capacity for the world, and you're still not going to use all the stuff that Indonesia produces.
So that's 15?
15, yeah.
150. 15, got it.
15.
Fine.
So
is it substitutable?
Well,
can tin be replaced in these circuit boards?
Yeah, you could use silver. It's quite expensive.
Oh, that's okay then. I was worried.
Oh, really?
I know.
No, so what you have seen, though, and it's quite interesting, is that you look at tin's price performance over the last 10 years, it's been a right old roller coaster ride, yeah? Every time it's got overexcited. What do you think every guy who uses tin does? They look to sort of like go back to the R&D, could we use a little bit less of it?
Yeah.
So, for example, we don't want to get too technical here, but if you get an old circuit board and look at the soldering, they use something called a punch-through technology, right? So the tin sort of like is punched through a little hole there and binds it on both sides. They do sit-on soldering now to reduce the amount of tin they use. This is an industry that has thrifted the amount of tin it uses for 10 years. There's always more to be done. But, this is not a new thing. People have been trying to sort of like, use as little tin as they can for many years. It's a volatile, highly priced commodity. So is it substitutable? Yes, but only with stuff more expensive. Could we use less of it? Yes, but bear in mind, they've been doing this for 10 years of thrifting, whether you be tin plate manufacturer or whether you be soldering. Everyone's been trying to use less tin. So you kind of wonder how much sort of stretched dynamic there is left on the demand side, right? You can't replace it with lead because we're trying to phase that out in our solder, which actually means we need to use purer and purer sort of like tin solders, right? No, there is, I think the big elasticity on the demand side, we've already done it. It's happened, right? because people have reacted to the tin price surges over the last 15 years, and trying to use as little as possible. But we're getting to a stage when it's getting rid of it or substituting what we have left is going to be really, really, really hard.
And then what are some of the other alternatives? We've talked about thrifting there. That's one such thing. Is recycling a thing? These circuit boards or the other use cases?
Yeah, recycling is the long-term solution for every single metal with a supply side stress, right? Tin already is recycled. Tin cans, if you think about it, stripped back, recycled into steel, recycled into tin, stripped out of it again, right? There is quite a lot of recycling goes on in the tin sector. Could there be more? Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the really interesting areas about what we do with e-waste or e-scrap, depending on what you want to call it. How many old mobile phones have you got sitting around your house? I've got a few. That's got tin in it on the circuit board, right? We're not very efficient recyclers of electronic scrap at the moment as people. That industry is gearing up as governments can understand. That's a great resource there. So yeah, there's potential. But again, once you just strip sort of a phone down, you get a really, really small amount of tin at the end of it. It can be recovered, obviously, right? But and this is one of the reasons I think people do get excited about tin, right? Because if we can't, try and take a step back from the data, the mechanics of the market right now, we kind of have a really good, positive demand picture going forward, right? And you talked about things like AI and sort of data centers, and they all use tin, right? Everything needs to be sort of circuit boarded together. So there's a really strong long-term demand story there. Supply, we have a couple of big headaches at the moment, and we have maybe structural issues around whether Indonesia really wants to be a supplier of refined tin as it is at the moment. We have not that many new projects coming on. A lot of the big mining companies, tin's too small for them, right? That's left to very junior companies who then quite often struggle, to get funding for sort of, for this sort of project. I do describe it sometimes as the forgotten critical metal, right? Because it is critical, and yet it doesn't receive nearly as much attention as, say, sort of lithium or copper does, right? I do think, the U.S. Department of Defense has just made its first award to a tin mining company, I should say a tin recycling company in the United States. So there is an awareness there, but they're obviously going down the route of, can we do more to recycle? Building new tin mines, it's not impossible, but there's not a lot of it going on at the moment.
Well, I think if you're an investor, having heard that, you now know a lot more about this space and the thematic. I think your general thought here is that it's going to be volatile, but this is a growing market. You have to assess the risk around on the supply side yourselves and take a view on that one. But as always, folks, you've got to look at and investigate market structure, do your own risk assessment and your investment horizon on this one. Get onto the various exchanges and take a look at maybe some of the options available to you. But this is a good starter as to what's happening in the world of tin.
And to some extent, look no further, call up a 15-year-old price chart of tin and look at the volatility. Just look at the historical volatility. And that tells you, it's a 400,000 ton global market, as you said. Small things can make big impacts in a market of that size, right? And the tin price history tells you how volatile it can be because of continuously challenged supply dynamics.
Well, look, Andy, home of Thomson Reuters, senior metals columnist. You can actually find him on the Reuters website. It's subscribed to it. It's cheap as chips. It's like 40 bucks, about 40 pounds, about 50 bucks to subscribe. And you're going to get a wealth of information in there. If you're into metals, that's the place to be. Andy, as always, really insightful. Really thank you for your time today. I better go away and see if what I want to go invest in the world of tin. Appreciate your time.
But don't blame me if the headline comes out about Myanmar reopening tomorrow, because we simply don't know. It could happen. It may not happen.
We know what we don't know, Andy.
We know what we don't. That's 10.